It doesn't happen in an explosion. It doesn't begin with betrayal, or with shouting, or with a slammed door. Respect dies quietly. It withers in small gestures, in subtle tones, in silences that sting harder than insults. The contempt spiral is not a sudden collapse. It's a slow erosion, like water carving stone. At first it seems harmless. A dismissive laugh here, a sarcastic jab there, a look of disgust that lasts a fraction of a second longer than it should. And yet, those micro-moments are the termites of intimacy. They eat away at the foundation until the entire structure of the relationship crumbles. Picture a house. On the outside, it looks intact. The walls still stand, the roof is still in place, the lights still glow. But inside, rot has spread through the beams. Every day, unseen, the structure weakens. That is contempt. In the beginning, partners can still smile, still share dinners, still post happy photos. But behind the scenes, respect is evaporating molecule by molecule. And when respect dies, everything else, desire, trust, even love, dies with it. The spiral begins innocently. One partner feels unheard, minimized, dismissed. A subtle frustration builds. Instead of addressing it directly, they weaponize contempt, sarcasm, eye-rolling, cold shoulders, quiet ridicule. The other partner senses the hostility and reacts with defensiveness, distance, or their own contempt. This creates feedback, each act of disrespect feeding the next, spinning downward like a whirlpool, pulling both into darkness. And the more it spins, the harder it is to escape. Contempt is not like anger. Anger still engages. It says, "I care enough to fight with you." Contempt says, "You are beneath me." It's poison disguised as interaction. It is the smirk that says, "I don't respect you anymore." And once that poison seeps into the bloodstream of a relationship, it spreads everywhere. Communication becomes war. Affection becomes obligation. Intimacy becomes performance. Every word is filtered through a lens of suspicion. Every silence feels like a verdict. Psychologists have called contempt the single strongest predictor of relationship failure. Not lack of love, not lack of compatibility, contempt. Because once respect is gone, love has nothing left to stand on. Without respect, attraction rots into disgust. Without respect, devotion mutates into resentment. Without respect, even the fondest memories are rewritten as delusions. It is not the absence of passion that kills relationships. It is the presence of contempt. The contempt spiral doesn't only kill romance, it kills masculinity in the eyes of a partner. A man who was once admired for strength is now mocked for weakness. A man once desired is now tolerated. A man once trusted is now doubted. The spiral is brutal because it transforms not just the relationship, but the self-image of the man trapped inside it. He begins to believe the contempt. He internalizes the narrative. I am inadequate, I am unworthy, I am failing. And from there, collapse becomes inevitable. But here's the darkest truth. Contempt does not arrive unannounced. It arrives as a test, disguised as playful jabs, disguised as just a joke, disguised as silence. Fail those tests, react with defensiveness, collapse under pressure, surrender your frame, and contempt begins its slow infection. Pass them. Stand calm, firm, unshaken, and respect remains. That's why this spiral is so dangerous. Most men never realize they are inside it until it's too late. By the time contempt is obvious, by the time the smirks become sneers and the silences become walls, the spiral is already deep. The respect has already died. And without respect, no apology, no gift, no effort can resurrect desire. That's why this episode is not just about awareness, it's about survival. Because if you don't learn to stop the contempt spiral early, it will consume everything. your relationship, your identity, your strength. This is the brutal truth. Respect does not die in a single moment. It dies in 1,000 cuts. And unless you learn to see the cuts, name them, and stop the bleeding, you will watch your relationship collapse in slow motion. Contempt is not just a bad habit or a communication flaw. It is a neurological and psychological phenomenon with devastating precision. When contempt enters a relationship, it does not simply add tension. It rewires the way both partners perceive each other. Neuroscience shows that contempt activates the same brain regions as disgust. The facial expression, a curled lip, a rolling eye, a sneer, isn't random. It is the body's primal way of saying, "You are beneath me, you are unworthy." And once one partner is coded in the other's mind as less than, the emotional system treats them not as an equal, but as an obstacle. Social psychology confirms this with brutal clarity. Contempt erodes empathy. When respect is present, empathy flows naturally. Misunderstandings are softened by goodwill. Frustrations are tempered by patience. But when contempt is active, empathy shuts down. The brain no longer seeks to understand. It seeks to dismiss, to ridicule, to minimize. What was once a partner becomes an irritation. Every word they speak sounds flawed. Every action is judged as inadequate. And this shift is self-reinforcing. Contempt makes empathy collapse, and the lack of empathy fuels more contempt. John Gottman, one of the most influential researchers on relationships, labeled contempt as the single strongest predictor of divorce. Why? Because contempt is more corrosive than anger. Anger still recognizes the other as an equal participant in conflict. Contempt says, "You are below me. You are not worthy of engagement." That is the true death of relational respect, not disagreement, but dismissal. And when dismissal becomes habitual, the relationship begins its slow collapse. Cognitive psychology explains how contempt spirals become traps. Each contemptuous act triggers defensiveness in the partner. Defensiveness, in turn, breeds more contempt. Look at how weak, how petty, how childish you are. This feedback loop is almost impossible to escape once it is entrenched. One sarcastic jab leads to defensiveness, which leads to withdrawal, which breeds more contempt, and the cycle spins downward until connection is replaced by coldness. Over time, even positive interactions are tainted because the mind begins to interpret them through the filter of contempt. Evolutionary psychology adds another layer. Contempt serves as a signal of mate deselection. In ancestral environments, showing contempt was a subconscious way of saying you are not fit to lead, to protect, to partner. In the modern world, this instinct remains, but it no longer serves survival. It serves destruction. A partner who feels contempt begins to devalue, to fantasize about alternatives, to emotionally detach long before the breakup. In that sense, contempt is the first betrayal. It is the beginning of exit, even if the body remains. From a systems perspective, contempt spreads like a virus inside the relationship. It starts small, often invisible. Tone, body language, sarcasm. But it conditions both partners into roles. One becomes the critic, the other the defender. And the critic sees only flaws. The defender feels only inadequacy. The more criticism is given, the more inadequacy grows. The more inadequacy grows, the more contempt the critic feels. Eventually, the critic no longer speaks to a partner. They speak to a caricature they've created, and the defender no longer hears words. They hear condemnation. Dialogue is dead, replaced by parallel monologues fueled by resentment. The contempt spiral doesn't just damage the relationship, it damages identity. Men in particular collapse when contempt replaces respect, because male psychology equates respect with worth. A man who loses respect in the eyes of his partner doesn't just feel rejected, he feels erased. He may still provide, still love, still sacrifice, But without respect, all his efforts feel hollow, and when he internalizes this dynamic, he begins to sabotage himself, silencing his own voice, over-explaining, or lashing out in desperation. Each reaction only feeds the spiral further. This is why contempt is not simply toxic behavior, it is the silent assassin of relationships. It transforms love into disdain, attraction into obligation, and intimacy into emptiness. Without intervention, the spiral always ends in the same place, either open collapse, divorce, breakup, or silent death, a relationship that exists only in form, not in substance. The tragedy is that most people do not recognize contempt early enough. They mistake it for stress, for humor, for normal couple fights. But the truth is brutal. Contempt is not just another conflict. It is the beginning of the end. 1. The micro-expression virus. It begins with small gestures so subtle that most men miss them. An eye roll, a sigh, a sarcastic tone. Psychology calls this contempt leakage, tiny expressions of disdain that bypass conscious filters and cut directly into the subconscious. These signals tell the brain, you are less. Over time, the target internalizes this dismissal without even realizing it. The mechanism is viral. Each micro-expression conditions the other to feel smaller, weaker, unworthy. What feels like a single joke is actually the first fracture in the foundation of respect. Hidden message, you are not equal, you are beneath me. 2. The inversion of empathy. In a healthy dynamic, empathy acts as a buffer. Mistakes are softened, flaws forgiven. But once contempt sets in, empathy flips into its dark mirror, mockery. Instead of listening, the partner ridicules. Instead of supporting, they dismiss. Cognitive psychology explains this as negative attribution bias, the tendency to interpret everything the other does through a lens of disdain. A late arrival becomes proof of irresponsibility. A slip of words becomes evidence of stupidity. Slowly, every act is recoded as failure. Hidden message. I no longer see your humanity, I only see your flaws. 3. The defensive feedback loop. Contempt doesn't exist in isolation, it provokes a counterattack. The target of contempt naturally becomes defensive. They justify, explain, or lash out, but defensiveness only validates the critic's contempt. See, you really are weak, you really can't handle it. Social psychology calls this a self-fulfilling loop. Contempt triggers defensiveness. Defensiveness triggers more contempt, and the spiral tightens with every interaction. What began as a tone of voice metastasizes into a permanent cycle where both partners play predictable roles, critic and defendant. Hidden message, you will always be on trial and you will always fail. 4. The status collapse respect is the oxygen of male identity. Once contempt strips it away, status in the relationship collapses. The man is no longer seen as leader, partner, or equal. He is seen as subordinate. Evolutionary psychology explains why this is lethal. Women subconsciously equate loss of respect with loss of security. When respect collapses, attraction follows. Even acts of provision or affection cannot revive it, because every gesture is reinterpreted as desperation. The man tries harder, but the harder he tries, the lower his status falls. Hidden message, you are no longer a partner, you are a subject. 5. The irreversibility, illusion. The final mechanism is the most devastating. Once contempt crystallizes, it feels irreversible. Neuroscience shows that contempt activates disgust pathways in the brain, wiring the partner's image as something repellent. Unlike anger, which burns and fades, disgust lingers. It rewires perception so deeply that even positive actions are dismissed as manipulation. This creates the irreversibility illusion. the belief that nothing can change, that the relationship is doomed. And tragically, this belief often becomes reality because once both partners accept it, they stop fighting for respect at all. Hidden message: there is no way back. You will always be despised. Together, these 5 mechanisms create the contempt spiral. Micro-expressions signal disdain. Empathy inverts into mockery. Defensiveness fuels the loop. Status collapses. And finally, contempt calcifies into disgust, convincing both partners that recovery is impossible. The tragedy is that most couples don't realize they're in this spiral until it's too late. They think they're arguing about chores, money, or timing. But beneath every fight, the real issue is that respect has already died and contempt has taken its place. The contempt spiral looks irreversible, but it isn't. While contempt corrodes faster than most relationships can repair, psychology shows us that patterns can be interrupted, rewired, and even reversed if both awareness and discipline are applied. Here is the survival manual. 5 counter strategies, each mapped to the 5 mechanisms of contempt. 1. Countering the micro-expression virus, awareness. Training. Micro-expressions are the seeds of contempt. The first survival rule is catch them early. Pay attention not only to words, but to the face, the tone, the pauses between sentences. A sigh isn't just breath, it's a signal. When you spot these cues, don't mirror them. Don't roll your eyes back or sigh louder. Instead, interrupt with calm presence. A soft acknowledgement, "I hear you," diffuses escalation. Practical tactic: record arguments with consent and replay them. Most couples are shocked at how much contempt leaks through tone. Awareness builds accountability. Never do. Ignore the signals. Contempt thrives in blindness. What you don't name, you can't change. 2. Countering the inversion of empathy. Reframe before reacting. When empathy flips into mockery, the temptation is to retaliate. But that fuels the spiral. The antidote is reframing. Instead of absorbing ridicule as truth, reinterpret it as a stress signal from the other side. Ask yourself, what pain is hiding under this mockery? Respond not to the insult, but to the need beneath it. Practical tactic: use the mirror plus redirect method. Briefly reflect back what was said. "I hear that you think I was careless." Then redirect to a constructive frame. "Let's talk about how to avoid this next time." Never do. Fire sarcasm back. Mockery meets mockery equals combustion. You may feel clever in the moment, but every counterjab chisels another crack in the foundation. 3. Countering the defensive feedback loop. Disarm with ownership. Defensiveness is gasoline on contempt's fire. The survival strategy is counterintuitive. Instead of defending, own selectively. Admit the small truth without surrendering your dignity. Practical tactic: use the 20% rule. Own 20% of the complaint, even if you feel 0% responsible. Example: "You're always late." "You're right, I was late today. Let's talk about how to fix that." This disarms the loop because defensiveness no longer fuels the critic. Never do. Justify endlessly. Explanations are not bridges, they are excuses dressed as logic. Every over-explanation confirms their contempt. 4. Countering the status collapse. Restore authority through boundaries. Respect dies when status collapses. The antidote is not louder demands, but quiet boundaries. Boundaries are status signals, lines that say, "I value myself enough to protect my space." Practical tactic: apply the if-then rule. Instead of begging for respect, state calmly, "If the conversation turns into insults, I will step away. We can continue when it's calm." Then follow through. Consistency rebuilds status far more than speeches. Never do. Overcompensate with gifts, promises, or overwork. Sacrifice made to buy respect back only deepens the perception of weakness. 5. Countering the irreversibility illusion. Reset rituals. The belief that contempt is permanent is perhaps the deadliest trap. To break it, couples need deliberate reset points, rituals that separate the past moment from the future possibility. Practical tactic: establish a weekly reset ritual. It could be a walk, a shared hobby, or even a structured dialogue where each person names one thing they appreciated that week. This interrupts the always never thinking that contempt feeds on. Never do. Assume time will heal contempt. Time heals distance, not disdain. Without conscious resets, contempt calcifies into disgust. The formula of survival contempt is not an unstoppable tide. It is a pattern, and patterns yield to awareness, discipline, and boundaries. The formula is simple. See, recognize the signals early. Name, identify the mechanism: mockery, defensiveness, collapse. Respond, apply the counter tactic calmly, without escalation. This is not about winning the fight. It's about refusing to enter the spiral at all. The man who masters this survival manual does not beg for respect. He commands it by refusing to feed contempt with weakness, excuses, or blind reaction. Contempt is not just an emotion. It is a virus. It corrodes slowly, then suddenly. What begins with a sigh, a rolled eye, or a sarcastic jab becomes, over months and years, the silent death of intimacy. Respect does not explode, it decays. And when respect dies, love becomes theater. Couples still smile for photos, still show up to family dinners, still post vacation pictures online. But behind the smiles, there is emptiness, routine, and sometimes quiet hatred. This is the contempt spiral, the invisible staircase that leads relationships not into passion, but into paralysis. The devastating truth is that contempt is often invisible to those inside it. We normalize it, we excuse it, we call it just stress, just personality, just a phase. Until one day, you wake up next to someone who no longer admires you, no longer listens to you, no longer respects you. The words might still be there, but the weight behind them is gone, and without respect, love suffocates. But here's the brutal clarity. Contempt does not have to win. Respect can be rebuilt, but it is not rebuilt with flowers, with apologies, or with desperate speeches. It is rebuilt with discipline, with boundaries, with consistent choices that demonstrate strength under pressure. Respect returns not when you beg for it, but when you command it, silently, through your actions. Psychology shows us that relationships never collapse because of problems. Every couple has problems. They collapse because of patterns. The contempt spiral is the most toxic of those patterns. And the only way to break it is not through promises, not through emotional explosions, but through interruptions. Micro-interruptions, small acts of awareness, tiny displays of composure that shift the frame and reset the dynamic. It is slow, but it works. If you take anything from this, let it be this: contempt is not the end. It is the warning. When you see it, you are at the edge of collapse. But edges can be stepping stones if you move with clarity. The man who survives is not the man who rages, not the man who begs, but the man who sees the code and acts with discipline. So here's what you do now. Stop explaining. Stop defending. Stop chasing approval. Start building boundaries. Start commanding respect through calm, consistent presence. Start rewiring the pattern before contempt becomes the only language left. Because in the end, relationships live and die not on love, but on respect. Love without respect is performance. Respect without love is control. Only when both exist together does intimacy thrive. And if you think this episode was powerful, understand this. It was only the surface. The contempt spiral is just one layer of the code. Beneath it lie deeper traps. Validation economies, intermittent reinforcement, the provider script that shape relationships in ways most people never see. If you want to master the code, if you want to stop being a prisoner of invisible patterns, then stay here. Subscribe. Turn on notifications, because the next episode is darker, sharper, and more dangerous. And if you thought contempt was destructive, wait until you see how validation itself bankrupts men in modern relationships. Don't walk into that trap blind. Stay with me, because survival isn't luck, it's awareness, and awareness begins now.